University, speaking after the death of a mentally ill young woman at another agency.
This situation could have happened differently. I think perhaps with more thoughtful action on the part of the police officers, maybe the death of this young woman could have been avoided.
It's hard to disagree with that statement, but let's go one step further and ask ourselves what thoughtful means. How do you thoughtfully encounter an upset, agitated person you might not even know is mentally ill? I have a hard time understanding the difference between someone who's mentally ill and somebody who's very intoxicated on drugs or alcohol. I bet that many people who use phrases like de-escalation training haven't thought the next part through. If somebody's shouting hysterically or focusing on a dangerous task and won't acknowledge you, the question is, what's next? Like, literally, what's next?
Goodness, I guess the first thing is to be very non-threatening and to establish that you're there to help them. A lot of it is not appearing that you're trying to argue with them or find blame with them. You want to get to the point where you establish some rapport where you can change their behavior, and that all begins with empathy.
This is one of the most vivid examples of how, in law enforcement, we can argue about policies and oversight, about transparency and procedures, but when things happen, they are intimately human, dynamic, interpersonal encounters. I'm reminded of the Mike Tyson comment that everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. Plus, there's Casey himself. I'm trying to see how he would not seem like a cop, how he would be non-threatening. On different days of the week, Bennett rides out with officers from Hurst or Euless or Bedford. He's got close-cropped hair, and he wears Oakley wraparounds. Bennett is former Army, and he's a clinician, but he kind of looks like a cop. Cops relate to and trust cops. So when you have a guy who looks like a cop riding with you, it can be good or it can be bad. Later, Casey told me plainly why Ken has the respect of the officers.
He's willing to get out on the street and really get dirty. He's negotiated with armed suicidal subjects face-to-face. You won't find a lot of clinicians that do that.
When we hit the streets, about 15 minutes in, we drove by J.A. Carr Park. Bennett spots a homeless man sleeping on the bench of a picnic table.
We got a homeless guy right there sleeping.
It wasn't easy to see. The guy was probably 100 yards away from the car as we drove by, but Ken saw him, and then Casey called it in on the radio and gave a description of what the guy was wearing.
284 checking the subject. He's a white male, blue jeans and gray shirt, 508 Simmons.
I was sitting in the back, and I would have bet $1 million that there was no homeless guy. Carr Park is where, in March of 2016, a meth addict shot and killed Euless officer David Hoffer. Hoffer had asked to see the man's hands, and the man shot him at point-blank range. The previous day, high on meth, Hoffer's murderer had been arrested for public intoxication and released the morning of the killing. His family blames police. It's their fault, the killer's father told the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. Why would they let him out when he was on that stuff? Today, we're walking close to where that happened. I see an older man with a beard, wearing a baseball cap, lying on the bench of a picnic table. We approach him, and he sits up with difficulty. He's wheezing.
We're the mental health guys. My name is Ken. I'm the mental health coordinator for Hurst, Euless, and Bedford PD. Officer Sanders is our mental health peace officer. And so we do a lot of work with the homeless. And we just saw you over here sleeping. We'll see if there's anything we can do for you to get you some help.
Man, I wish I could. I mean, I don't want to be out here.
Your ribs are broken now?
Yeah.
Trying to make it? How'd you break your ribs?
I fell.
Where'd you fall at? Did you fall here in the park or?
No.
Up there? Okay. I know you have a hospital ban on.
Yeah, I just got a hospital.
When'd you get out?
They put you.
Okay. Did they check your ribs out?
Yeah.
What'd they say?
They're broke.
So they're broke? Did they do anything for them?
No.
Okay. Let me see your hospital ban. Is it what's the date on that? 10/6/2017.
As Ken is looking at the hospital band, seeing when the guy was last looked at, Casey, who's been behind the man, moves to a different angle and says, "Hey, is that you, Floyd?"
Hello, all right.
Floyd?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't recognize you.
That's me.
Casey's genuinely happy to see him. Then he tells us a little bit about Floyd. How Floyd has only been homeless for about 10 years, but before that, he'd owned a house right there in Euless.
Floyd has the distinction of having everything happen to him and he's still alive. He's been stabbed, shot, run over.
Damn, Floyd.
He's been around a long time. Right? So how old are you, Floyd?
I'll be 65 by next birthday.
And no matter what I said about how Casey looks, you've heard him. He's doing exactly what he said he would do. He's empathetic, he's non-threatening, he's helpful. He's exactly who should be doing this. Casey calls the medics, and Floyd, Ken, and I chat a bit. Ken looks concerned. To me, Floyd is being rational and cooperative, but he's in a lot of pain. It's hard for him to speak, and he's clearly in discomfort. He's not asking for anything, but I notice that he accepted the help pretty quickly. Ken asks Floyd if he's got any mental health diagnoses. At first, Floyd jokes about it, saying his diagnosis is that he's throwed off.
Floyd, do you have a mental health diagnosis?
Yeah, I'm both off.
What's that? What?
I'm both off.
You throw it off?
A Texas euphemism for mentally ill. But then he says he has a diagnosis of clinical depression. As we're waiting for the medics, I notice a few more things, but basically I was missing everything. Ken wasn't. Casey wasn't. In fact, what I was seeing here was exactly what Casey had described to me. Floyd's affect was flat. He was quiet. When he reported what he was feeling, he didn't exaggerate. This guy's saying he's sleeping on a bench with broken ribs and he can hardly breathe, but what he's not doing is complaining about it. Floyd's worried he won't get into homeless services because he doesn't have an ID. And he also doesn't have the money to get his prescription for pain medication filled.
Some resources to get hooked up with homeless outreach. Maybe go to a shelter and they can hook you up with clothing and some food.
But I have an ID. They won't let me go to the shelter with ID.
Well, they'll help you get the ID.
They'll help you with
Here's what I want you to do. When you get out of the hospital, I want you to call this number right here, okay? You'll get a hold of us. We'll come by and pick you up. We'll take you down to homeless outreach. We'll drive you down there. They'll help you get an ID so you can get in the shelter, and they'll help you get back on your feet. And you're going to qualify for services since you have clinical depression.
What's interesting to me is that Hurst and Euless and Bedford are doing this thing, this totally non-standard thing in which they're providing a combination of social services and policing, which runs counter to the conventional wisdom about policing, where a common statement is, we're cops, not social workers. I wouldn't say cops are the best way to handle this, but I can't help but notice that no one else is around to find Floyd and bring him back into the hospital. I mean, here's a guy lying on a park bench who can't breathe, who's in so much pain he's contemplating suicide. If not the cops, then who? It's cheaper to do it this way. It's cheaper to bring him directly to the county hospital and get him the help he needs than to wait for him to get in trouble or to commit a crime and then have to go sort that out. But as Ken says, we're all fine to spend money to build new jails, but not to build new hospitals. As if mental hospitals are a sign of creeping socialist laziness while jails are a sign of strength in the face of threats to public safety. One of the biggest problems, in fact, faced by BIU is a result of trying to divert to mental health facilities that have no beds available. The question administrators always ask when trying to solve this problem is, divert to where? Still, I didn't have an understanding of how credible was Floyd's outcry. In the police car, as we drove to the hospital behind the ambulance, I asked.
I mean, for a guy that's been through so much as he has, like I said, he's literally had all those traumatic events, stabbing, shooting, run over. He's a fighter, you know? And for him to come out and say, yeah, I'm depressed, I'm suicidal, that carries a lot of weight.
I don't get the feeling that Casey is easily hornswoggled. The other thing is that he actually knew Floyd. He had a baseline to compare against.
Well, that's a good thing about the BIU is that someone in the unit is going to have some historical information. For instance, Officer Sanders here had that historical information. So when we look at how to articulate this, you know, we take a guy that probably would never ask for help, and he's at that point now where he's ready to check out, especially after everything else he's been through. I wouldn't doubt that he wouldn't try it. Biggest fear is that he would lay there on that park bench. He hasn't eaten in a couple days, and he may end up just passing away.
We get Floyd to the John Peter Smith Hospital, JPS, where he was admitted and checked out by a doctor. I knew one of the ER nurses.
What are you doing here? Go this way.
She gave me a hug, and then when we got into the room, she asked Floyd a lot of the same questions that Ken and Casey had asked.
They told me you had thoughts of hurting yourself?
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Oh, I'm just depressed because I'm hurting.
The pain's making you depressed?
Yeah.
Do you have a plan to hurt yourself?
No, not really.
Not really.
Unless you were going to hit yourself, Floyd.
I'd like to.
You'd like to?
Yeah.
Have you made any attempts today?
No.
Have you taken any drugs or alcohol? No. Any prescription medication?
And then we hit the road again. From BIU's perspective, this was an easy case. They seek to help people before there's a crisis. It doesn't always go this easily. Sometimes the people are angry. Sometimes they fight. Urinate on themselves or on you. Run. Sometimes they're committing serious crimes and they have to be locked up. This all comes into specific focus this year with the passing in Texas of the Sandra Bland Act, named for the young woman who was found dead in a Texas jail just days after a white state trooper arrested her in a confrontational encounter. Here's what most people in America remember about Sandra Bland.
Get out of the car!
And then
I will light you up! Get out!
Wow.
Now!
Wow.
Get out of the car!
Really, for a failure to signal. You're doing all of this for
Get over there!
The arrest was wrong. The trooper was an ass, and then he lied. He was charged with perjury and fired. But Sandra Bland didn't die when she was arrested. She said during jail intake that she had recently attempted suicide. Instead of being brought for mental health observation, she was confined in the Waller County Jail in conditions that were wholly inappropriate for someone with mental illness. She committed suicide after 3 days in that cell. The Sandra Bland Act shifts responsibility for caring for and helping the mentally ill back to Texas's mental health care system. It's a major piece of legislation that can be a game changer. It says that the place we were tucking away the mentally ill for so long, in a way that made them so hard to count, is less of an option. Now, whether Texas's mental health care system has the capacity to handle a major influx of new patients is a troubling, unanswered question. Once it adapts, however, Texas will lock up fewer people for whom jail is a wholly inappropriate measure. The BIU predates Sandra Bland by 3 years. And while very few people have a BIU, it's not as if other agencies are doing nothing. Last week, Tarrant County Sheriff Bill Wayburn sent out an email to every police chief in Tarrant County saying that if they had someone in their jail with a mental health issue, they could be sent to Tarrant County Jail, in which there's a forensic unit with a full-time psychiatrist.
We'll take them. We will take them so that we can get them straight into services so they don't decompensate.
Because finding beds for an inmate with a mental health issue is very challenging. Every jail has the divert to where question.
We've got 41 municipalities and over 51 agencies that may be dealing with these people, from hospitals to universities to railroad cops.
Most of the 51 agencies in the county don't have the officers to spend, sometimes up to an hour, getting someone signed in to Tower 10, a room at JPS filled with recliners and people milling around waiting for disposition. It can take a lot longer if the client needs medical attention first. In Tower 10, where the client will sometimes wait for a day or more to get one of their 96 beds, only to be sent out to the lobby, where they'll wait 4 to 8 more hours to get back in and then start waiting again. Time is important. Sheriff Wayburn used the word decompensate, a term of art that describes someone who's starting to lose their ability to maintain normal psychological demeanor and revert to anxiety or delusions or even plain depression. Tarrant County, like Hurst, Euless, and Bedford, has moved to get all their officers certified as Texas mental health peace officers. If you're going to have a mental health unit in the jail, it should be a good one. As I was up in Sheriff Wayburn's office recording him for this, a hilariously cute Labradoodle puppy wearing a tactical harness trotted into the room and walked up to him and placed her muzzle on his leg. Wayburn's a pro, and he just incorporated her into what he was saying, but it really surprised me.
We're trying to employ other things in our jail, including Corporal Nova.
Yeah, can you describe people can't see?
Yeah, Corporal Nova is our service dog, and she just came back from the jail. She's in the briefing with our people. She's been patrolling pods today. She's just trying to lower and de-escalate things in the jail. She's a comfort dog for the jail and victims and everything else.
I've known Wayburn for 10 years. I've never thought of him as a service dog kind of guy. He's more of a numbers guy. I asked him about the cost of the training, and he dismissed it.
We got to do ongoing training anyway, and it's just part of the practice of law enforcement today.
Divert to where?
A lot of times you can't divert someone to a long-term facility because they don't have an ID, or their social security card isn't right, or they have a different alias.
That's my friend Haley Stewart. We went to the police academy together. She worked at a county hospital as a mental health peace officer, and now she's pre-law at Texas Wesleyan, interning for the county mental health court judge. When she passes the bar, she wants to practice mental health law.
Or we've dealt with them so often that the staff is tired of dealing with them. They don't believe that they're suicidal. They think they're shelter-seeking or food-seeking. And a lot of times they are. So do we run the risk of putting someone in a bed that's shelter-seeking where we don't have room for someone who truly is suicidal or homicidal at that point?
Something you should know about Haley, she takes this very personally. In the academy, they ask us all a question. Why do you want to be a cop? Lots of us said goofy stuff about driving fast and carrying guns. Haley said, because I'll get to see people on the worst day of their lives and I'll have a chance to make a difference. She still believes that. So to Ken and